Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Dan Rodney and I'm going to be giving today's live stream for modern web and mobile design techniques. I'm an instructor and course developer at Noble Desktop. If you're not familiar with Noble Desktop, we're an Adobe authorized training center in New York City, and we teach people all sorts of design and web and coding related technologies. So web design is a very popular thing that we teach, and we teach people how to code HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as how to design and create web graphics, whether it's using Photoshop or Sketch, Adobe Experience Design. We teach these types of things. We teach in person in New York City, or a lot of our classes you can attend online. We do live online, so you attend while the people are attending in person as well. So you kind of tune in to the same exact class. We don't do the kind of pre-recorded classes. We do live so that you can talk to the instructor and participate just as though you were in a class in New York City or just tuning in live online. We also sell some great step-by-step workbooks, which are mentioned here on the screen next to me. And those are awesome project-based step-by-step things that you can go through and learn how to use these programs. So if you can't take a class and you'd prefer doing a book, those are a great way to learn because it walks you through every step of doing things, whether it's coding or using these design tools. So there is going to be a presentation today that is in the description of this video, but I'm going to also paste it into the chat right now. If you're watching later the recording, I'll make sure that I put this into the description of the recording, and I'll also show it to you here when I go full screen. So let me switch over here to share my screen. So part of it will be live demonstration, and then part of it will be given here in the browser. We've got these notes kind of taken down for you, and the URL here is nobledesktop.com/presentation/modern-webdesign-livestream. And we'll keep this page up, so it should be available for you in the future. You don't have to follow along on your browser. I'm going to be going through this myself, showing to you, so you don't have to follow along, but you can have this for reference later for clicking links and going to the information that's in here. You just use your arrow keys to navigate back and forth between the slides, or if you're on a touch device, you can swipe to switch between the slides as well. So what we're going to talk about today: user experience design, or UX for short, is what we call user experience design. Visual or user interface design, UI is for user interface. Workflows, design tools and design apps, and do you need to know code? So this is the general overview of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. If those are interesting for you, you are in the right place. Okay, so we're calling this modern web design, modern web and mobile design techniques. So what do we define as a modern website? Websites come in all types and all sizes, from single page scrollers to huge sites with thousands or millions of pages. They could be really simple, basic text, images, or they could be something complex that have lots of user interactions. They could be more of a web application, like think about the mobile version of Facebook or Twitter in your browser, or Google Maps. You know, those are more web apps than they are just an ordinary website that shows content. They require they should look nice, of course, but they should be better than just looking nice. They should also be easy to use and intuitive for users. And that basically just means that there should be a good user experience as well as it being attractive. That's the idea. I've seen some beautiful designs that people have put out, and they're beautiful, but they're hard to use, and that's just not a good experience. So we want beautiful and easy to use. And they should be mobile optimized for any really type of device, whether it's a mobile phone, a tablet, a desktop. It should work well on every device that's out there. So let's start talking about user experience design. What is user experience design? It's the design of user interactions. Now this could be for anything, a system, a product, it could be an application, it could be a website. When you think of user experience, even the experience of walking into a store, picking off something off a rack, going to the register and purchasing it, that's a user's experience. Today we're talking about web and mobile design, so that's what we're kind of focusing this thought of user experience on, but it's really the design of someone interacting with something, whether it's physical or digital. So that user's behaviors, their attitudes, their emotions, how they feel, how they think, that's the stuff that user experience designers care about and think about. They're going to look at those things and try to make it efficient and easy to use. So something could be easy to use, but if it takes a long time, maybe that process could be made better. Maybe it could be made more efficient. Or maybe something's fast, but it's kind of annoying to do. Maybe that could be made more enjoyable. So these are all things that a user experience designer cares about. Often I hear this idea that, oh, isn't user experience isn't that just obvious? Don't people just know that? And I think that it's kind of like with computers. Don't you just hit a button and it works? It's not quite that simple. And the easiest thing to think about is, if everything was just common sense, wouldn't we never have a bad experience? They were just, if everybody could just use their common sense and say, oh, this is the way it should be, then everybody would have a great user experience. But it's not. I'm sure you've all done a website or an app and not enjoyed the experience. It was hard to use, hard to find something, and so it's not always just common sense. There are specific practices and things that you can do to figure out a better user experience and to make sure that it's a good user experience. So I think a mistake that people make is just thinking that you understand all users. Thinking more so kind of thinking that everybody's like you. And that's something that, it's like the men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Different people think differently. We all come from our own perspective. And the best thing you can do is realize that you can only be in your own mind. And it's hard to think like other people because you don't have their perspective. So it's really by observing other people and seeing their perspective that you're going to learn things that you would have never thought about to begin with, because you just come from a different perspective. You don't think of it from that avenue. I know my wife thinks of things and asks questions that I would never think about. And I'm just like, how did you come up with that? How did you think that? But she just comes at it from a different perspective than I do. And it's not that she's wrong and I'm right. It's just we come at it from different perspectives. And so it's just the thing that you have to be respectful of other people's perspectives and not just assume that everybody should think like you, and that if they don't, it's just a matter of getting them to think like you. And you don't even realize how other people think until you see them. So it's really observing other people. So the more user testing you can do, the better. Sometimes people say, well, I don't have the time or the budget to do extensive user testing. Well, at least try to do the little bit that you can do. Show it to other people, get their opinion. I know that when I do a design, if I only do it and I get no feedback from people, when I eventually do show it to people, they often give me some good ideas. Let's say I have to do something and I don't have any time to show it to somebody, I need to throw it up there real quick. Once it's launched, I'm going to get feedback from users and see what they think, and just show it to at least some people. Get their feedback if you can before you launch it. That's always the best thing. But even if you can't do it before you launch, after you launch, be responsive to feedback that people give you, and don't just dismiss it as, oh, that's just this one person. There might be other people. That might be the only person that actually spoke up about that to you. So try to show it to as many people as you can, incorporate their feedback, and respect their viewpoint. So user experience is kind of a broad thing that reaches many different aspects of design. And when we think about design is really creative problem solving. And so what comes under UX? Well, there's visual design of how things look and how things appear. That's part of it. And I think sometimes people focus on that because that's the thing that you end up seeing and interacting with. But there's a lot more to it than just the visual design. But that's certainly part of it, because that is the final piece you're going to see and interact with digital products. But information architecture. So how, when you go to a website and you see a navigation, like let's say Lowe's or Home Depot, for example, who organized their menus into the specific structure? If you think about users and how they would logically group things, you have to think in terms of the user. How would they think to go find a product, and how would you group that information and kind of architect it so that they can have an easy way to find that information? That's just one example of information architecture, of how do you just put together your information in easy, presentable, logical groupings is just one aspect. Interaction design. So when people are using a product, things like animation and timing, how people are kind of using your product, the way they're interacting with it. There's also things that interact with, they change their interactions and affect how they think about a product and how they work with it. So just designing those interactions, making it usable, easy to use. So are things discoverable? Are they intuitive? Usability, studying that stuff. Part of it could be accessibility, making sure that it's accessible to people that might have vision impairments, but it's a kind of a broad topic just by itself. User research, understanding your users. Who is going to be using your product, what's important to them, and actually studying and talking to them, finding out what's important to users, part of user experience. And content strategy. So what content am I going to have? What features of an app am I going to have for people? By understanding users, you start to understand their needs. And if you didn't do the user research and you underestimated a need, you might not build that feature into your product. I know, for example, when I was building, I make an add-on for Adobe InDesign called Proper Fraction. And when I was originally creating it, I was creating it for a company, and they said, hey, I really need to create recipes where there's steps and there's a list of ingredients. And our steps are a different font from our list of ingredients. So can you make it fine fractions in a font? And that wasn't necessarily a feature I would have thought about when initially creating it. I just thought I'd find all the fractions regardless of font. But because they were using it and they requested that feature, I built in that feature right from the very beginning. But that's where getting to know your users and what's important to them, that's going to help you actually define your product. And this could be in the case of an app, you actually build features around that. But in the case of a website, it's maybe content that you develop to show to those users. So how do you market to those users? How do you create your content and send it to them? That's all part of content strategy. So really, there's a lot that goes into user experience. It's a broad umbrella that encompasses lots of different types of things. UI, or user interface design, also called visual design by some people, that's just one aspect of user experience. And all these parts are all, it's a variety of different things, but they're all important. So the user interface or visual design creates the aesthetic look and feel of the site or the app. And ideally, those things are all based on your insights from your user experience design, your information architecture. All that type of stuff informs, finally, how this thing is actually going to look and work. I love this quote by the CEO of Jaguar. If you think good design is expensive, you should look at the cost of bad design. And that's a tricky thing for some clients to understand, because you can't always present them with the bill for bad design, because the bad design might be lost revenue. And you can't always prove that sometimes, because you don't want to do the bad design, show them that it didn't work, then do a good design and show them it did work, and just show them the difference, because you want to do good design right from the beginning. But really, bad design can cost you tons of lost business, and you can't quantify that because you don't know what you lost. If they do have a current design and you redesign it and you look at the before and the after, and now you're making a lot more money, or even just a little bit more money with the redesign, you can clearly say, hey, this design made this much of a financial difference. And that's the idea of good design. Yeah, you're going to pay for good design, but that might make you more money, so it can be worth the investment in the good design, because why lose money to bad design? So I'm going to go through different examples of why user experience matters, why user interface design matters, and why usability matters. And these are just a couple examples to show why all of these things are important and how each one of them makes a different impact in the final website or application. And these are all articles that you can link out to read if you want to read these, but I'll just kind of describe these. So in this case, the $300 million button, basically this was a big site that was already doing a ton of revenue, and in their checkout process, when somebody would go to check out, it would make them create an account before they checked out. And some people didn't want to do that. So some people would abandon their cart and just not check out. I guess they didn't want that product enough. So what they did, I know they say that that's the $300 million button. They said that they changed one button. It was a little bit more than that, but that's kind of a punchy headline. Basically, the deal was that they instead of making people sign up for an account right at the beginning of the process, they let them go through as a guest, check out, and then at the end, they made an optional create an account button at the end. So they basically moved the button for create an account from a mandatory thing at the beginning of the process to an optional thing at the end. So in not requiring them to create an account, they made $300 million more. So that was a big change. But it was a user experience change. The interface changed a little bit, but that wasn't that somebody said, oh, I'd like the button here rather than there. Aesthetically, that wasn't a visual change. That was a user experience change. Hey, let's not make people sign up for an account. Let's make it optional. If they want to at the end, they can, but we're not going to force them. It's a different user experience, and that yielded them more money. 37 Signals, if you know Basecamp, that's one of the products that they put out. They make this thing called Basecamp. They did something related to their user experience. This wasn't a website thing per se, but in selling Basecamp, maybe not everybody knows that 37 Signals is the seller of Basecamp. So what people were doing is they were looking at their credit card company receipts and seeing that somebody charged them for something. And they're like, I don't know what this thing is. And so they would do a chargeback thinking that they didn't know what that was. They didn't buy that when in fact they actually had purchased that product. They just didn't associate the names properly. So what they did is they changed it. They put a name of website instead of the name of the company. Now, if you're looking at your credit card statement, you're like, I wonder what that thing is. So then you go to that website and you type it in. Why is there a charge on my credit card? It's a monthly charge for one of our products. And then they see, oh, that's right, Basecamp or Backpack or whatever these things are that I purchased. I remember that. I didn't remember 37 Signals maybe, but I remember the product that I purchased. And so they reduced the chargebacks by 30%. People that had already purchased their product but just didn't know the name of the company, they were doing chargebacks, and so they were losing customers from chargebacks and having to deal with all this administrative hassle of trying to get the charge done again properly. And so that's a different user experience that is beyond using their product. It's just a related thing. So I liked that example wasn't the actual website, but it was related to it. It's all part of the user experience of having a good company and a good product. So those are all user experience design things. Somebody thought through what's that experience of doing a chargeback and how can we reduce people wanting to do chargebacks. Visual design also matters. How something looks certainly matters. If something's ugly or something's beautiful, that'll make a difference. But beyond that, let's say you have two different pages that are both beautiful. One might perform better than the other because of certain things. These are two examples. This website did a test of a green button and a red button. Now on this page, most of these elements are kind of similarly colored. There's a lot of green. And so the call to action didn't start out as much. They tried it with red. There's not really much red, certainly not that big of a red, so this red really stands out. And so the red won. More people clicked the red button. So specifically, it was a 21% lift in conversions by just changing the button color. Now, that's not to say go out and make all of your buttons red, because it depends on your page. Red might not be the perfect color. It's that the color stood out differently from everything else on the page. So just changing a button color in the same exact design could make your page perform better. So those choices, even just choosing a color, that's so important for people designing for the web to make your calls to actions stand out, make them obvious. Changing an image, same kind of idea. Instead of changing a color, let's swap out an image. They made, 161% lift in conversions. No, I don't want to allow that. Let's go down here. And so they kept the same page. When you're doing these kind of tests, we call these A/B tests. Don't change other things on the page, because then you don't know what actually did the change. Just change one thing and then test it. And give it a little while to do the testing, because if you only test it for an hour here and an hour there, that's not really a good sample size. You want to give it a good range of users. Depends on, of course, how much traffic you're getting, but give it a good number of users and really see if it's a quantifiable change. So they just swapped out the photo from this to this. Now, this is a a truck driving school. They want to get people to sign up to come to learn how to drive a truck. And this guy is driving a truck. So yeah, it looks like truck driving classes. But this guy over here, first of all, he's happy. This guy's not. And so this guy over here on the right, he sold 161% better than the guy on the left. Also notice too that there's a logo in here. The website's in here. There's a subtle call today, or not so subtle call today. So there's kind of calls to actions hidden in there to like subliminally say, hey, you know, we're an authority, we're on a bus, call. And so this just drove more people to actually go ahead and register for this. So try things out. You know, if you're not sure, and also if a client is saying, well, I don't like that, and you believe in it, then do an A/B test. Try it one way, try it another way, and you can't argue with hard numbers. If something is more successful because you've tested it in front of users, then nobody can really argue with that when one thing is more successful than others. I know I was training some people from Saks Fifth Avenue, and the designers and even myself didn't really like that there was some icons for secure credit cards at the bottom of the page. It said, you know, like website secure, and it had the credit card icons. And I and the designers were talking to the web development team saying, hey, you know, we really don't think that this is necessary. This is Saks Fifth Avenue. It's a trustworthy brand. Do people really not trust the website? Of course it's secure. And the web developers said, hey, we tested it. We did an A/B test with it and without. And in their case, they said with the icons there, they sold more. So they had higher profits. And we couldn't argue with that. Even though we didn't think it was necessary, users felt more comfortable by seeing that in their case. For their users, they tested on their people. It wasn't some just theoretical asking. They just did the change on their actual website. Some people saw it with, some people saw it without the icons, and they did better when the icons were there. And they didn't change anything else, just that. So ultimately, I had nothing that I could say other than I don't aesthetically like it, but if the results are that they're better with it, there's no arguing that. Usability also matters. We want these things to be easy to use, easy to understand for users. Here's a variety of things. There's lots of things on all these topics that we could talk about. But something as simple as showing a password, especially on mobile when it's so easy to type in the wrong thing on these little keyboards. It's really something to think about is how is it like typing in passwords? People are always making mistakes on that. So by default, password fields show ... And the idea is you don't want people looking over your shoulder to see your password. Now, how many times are you really typing in a password with somebody looking over your shoulder? Sometimes, certainly. But a lot of times, nobody's looking at your phone or nobody's looking at your computer. So wouldn't it be better if you could just reveal your password just to make sure that you typed it in properly? So now people are starting to think, hey, let's make an option to hide or show the password. So you can click hide and it'll do the dots, or you can click show and reveal it. So that way you can look at it and just make sure that you typed it in properly. Nice idea. For example, PayPal has the same thing. Hide and show like so. Hide and show like so. Here, other apps were doing it. Here's a little icon for the hide and the show. Same thing here for Adobe. Here, using icons or words. Windows 8 had the strangest little icon because I don't know what that thing is versus that thing is. That just looks like, I don't know, like a rainbow over the sun or something, like a ball. It almost looks like a tire on a car. Yeah, it's kind of a weird icon there. But to just be able to show that text when somebody's typing it, if they want, is something that could make that easier. Check boxes to do that, of course. Now, one interesting thing is that when they showed people just the plain text password and it wasn't the little bullets, some people started getting a little suspicious and thinking, hey, I shouldn't be able to see this. And it's interesting. Some people would actually think, oh, because this looks like plain text, is this going to be secure? Like, shouldn't that stuff be hidden? And they actually kind of associated that they could see it with maybe that other people could see it. And just adding an option here to show the password kind of made them feel more secure. Like some people think, oh, I have to hide it before I submit it because then that will make it secure. Kind of made people feel better about it. So, that's where testing it in front of users. If you have this cool idea, especially an idea that's different than normal, you really want to show people the thing. And I might not have thought about, oh, people will distrust this if they can see it, but now it kind of makes sense. I understand that idea. Not everybody's as good with technology. They might not realize, hey, once this is submitted, it's going to be securely stored. So test it in front of different types of users and see what their reaction is and see if what you think is going to happen actually happens. Another thing is filling out forms. And I know a bunch of these are forms, but that's not the only usability thing out there. There's a trend to just make the form thing and put the text that is the label directly into the form field. The problem is that if you start typing, then you no longer know what that field is for. So for example, if you have first name and last name and you filled them in wrong, then you wouldn't know it. Now you might say, well, I would never do that. But what if you have a password manager like 1Password or LastPass, and what if it automatically fills out the form? Or a lot of browsers nowadays do autofilling. What if they autofilled it wrong? You wouldn't be able to tell the difference that it was automatically filled in wrong, because if you don't see the label and you just see the text, it all might look fine, even though they might be in totally the wrong place. So it's best to have the label outside so that you can see the label and the stuff that you're typing. Now, some people then put in a hint, like must be at least 6 characters. But again, as you start to type it, then if that hint goes away, they'd have to remember what that hint is. So really, it's best to show the label and the hint so that people don't have to remember what those things are. Because what if they typed in the wrong one? How do they know what they're supposed to type in? They still need to be able to see those hints. Some people are starting to make what they're calling adaptive placeholders. Basically, it's a placeholder that's in the field, but when you click in the field, it moves up somewhere. Moves up above, moves in line like this, so that then once you've clicked into it, then you can see your stuff that you typed as well as this. I have an animated version of this here that you can see. So as you start to tap into the different fields and you start to oops, didn't mean to click on that. As you start to type, the thing goes up and goes small. It certainly looks cool. There's a couple issues with it that make it not quite so perfect. When the label does move up, it gets smaller, and so that's harder to read. So anybody with vision impairments, that might be illegible for them because it's just too small, especially for the ones that aren't active. When they gray out the text, there's so little contrast to that small gray type like that might be just illegible to a big portion of your audience, depending on how good their vision is. So just kind of another usability thing to think about. Mystery meat navigation, the usability of menus. We have the 3-lined menu and we have the 3-dot menu. I love how Luke calls this the hamburger and the kebab, because it kind of looks like shish kebabs. So that's why he's calling it mystery meat. Is it between the burger or the kebab? And in a case like this, what's behind door number 1? What's behind door number 2? You don't really know. In fact, in Chrome here, in the browser, they have the kebab menu. It actually used to be the hamburger menu, but if you go way back, actually, the Chrome browser menu over there has gone through a variety of icons. I believe it's been a gear, it's been a wrench, and then once mobile started catching on, it became the hamburger and eventually the kebab. Android does a little bit more with the kebab menus than the hamburger menus. But all of them are meant to be like ... list is meant to indicate a list of things, but you have no idea what's behind it. So some people just don't tap on it because they don't know what's in there. There's a lot of debate as to whether that's good or not to use that menu icon, because it might decrease the number of people tapping on it to go in there because they just don't know what they're going to get when they do go in there. So there's a lot of debate as to the effectiveness of that. But let's say you are using that. This initial opening graphic is a horrible graphic because it's just got this giant 3-lined menu. It's like the biggest burger that you've ever seen. And they call it a burger because it's the bun on the top and the bottom and the meat in between. And burgers are on the menu. Bop, bop, bop. I know it's a bad joke, but I always have to make that joke. So this was, they were they were making an app and they wanted to try different types of menu icons. The three lines with the word menu underneath it, and 3 lines with an outline to kind of make it look more like a button. And they track different ones. This is a bit of an old article. Some of the images are missing, but if you click on them, then you can actually get the bigger versions where you can see the results. And so they tested different ones and saw which ones perform better. And ultimately, this is the one that they chose because being pink, which fit into their color scheme. So again, don't make all your menu buttons pink just because they did. Make it something that in their case, they found that making it stand out increased engagement, and people clicked on it and they shopped around more and they made more money just because that icon stood out. If it didn't stand out, people didn't tap on it, they didn't interact with it, they didn't go there. And they could have potentially tried other things like, what if it didn't say menu? What if it said something else? Or what if there were tabs at the bottom that did something? What if there were other navigation techniques? Maybe they could increase their profit even more, making it even more discoverable. But in this case, just even changing the menu button around led to an increase in revenue. So there's lots of different things that you can think about in trying to make your website or app more usable. So user experience and user interface design. The UX design encompasses many disciplines, including UI. And really, for some people, when they're doing UX design, they also might be doing some UI design. It might be preliminary prototyping type design. It might not be fine-tuned visuals. But some UX designers also do very tight UI design. It just depends on the client and the company that you might be working at. Bigger projects are more likely to have UX and UI designers working together, whereas smaller projects or smaller companies might have just a single designer doing it all, UX and UI. Your smaller projects might not have as much time and budget for the UX design, and your bigger projects might spend more time on that stuff. Just try to, even on those smaller projects, to do whatever you can do. The more you can do, the better. Try to do as much of it as you can. So visual designers, even if you're not doing the UX, I think the more you understand about UX, the better you're going to be as a visual designer, because that just informs what you're doing. You want to understand the why, not just, oh, I'm going to make this look pretty. So some challenges, I think, for people, especially new designers getting into this, is really, it's that why. Why are you doing something? Don't just say, well, it looks pretty. If you're choosing a button color, say, okay, so does this stand out, or how does this need to stand out very much? Like, this is a secondary button, so I don't want that to stand out as much. So you really think about why you're making all these decisions. And how are users going to react? Will they understand what you're trying to do? They don't always understand. I know I've done designs and I think people are going to get the point, but I put it in front of them and they don't. And I just have to suck it up and say, okay, well, I tried it, but it didn't work. Let me go back and try to figure out something where they will understand it. Just test it on people, because that's the only real way you're going to know. If they don't get it, go back and change your design, refine it. This is a question especially targeted to people that are doing print design, that are getting into web design. Sometimes I see print designers, and I'm not picking on print designers here, it's just I happen to notice a trend of teaching a lot of print designers that are coming to the web, and they try to do things that are totally unique and interesting, and they feel the need to innovate on the web in a way that has never been seen before. Because they're thinking, I want to create something totally new and unique. And to some extent, visually and brand-wise, your websites should be unique. But there should be some common things, like navigation is often at the top or the left, because that's where just users expect that navigation to be. So sometimes there are some common norms. Like, for example, in a book, page numbers are typically at the bottom, somewhere at the bottom. And so if you put a page number in a totally different place, people might not know where that page number is. So there's norms on the web as well. And so if you're coming into this and you really look at something and you're like, have I ever seen a website do this before? If you've never seen somebody do it before, you really got to ask yourself, maybe there's a reason. Why didn't they do this? Is it going to be obvious? And really test that on other people to see if they get this thing that you're trying to do. It's not to say you can't come up with something new and innovative. I don't want to squash creativity, but kind of learn the norms first and then see how you can break those. So, there's going to be some commonalities. You can still do a brand unique website, even following some of the norms that are out there. And for usability, some of those norms that people are used to are good to follow, because then people will understand how to use your website or your app. So as far as workflow, because we got UX, we got UI, how does this all come together? Everybody has different workflows. There's not just one workflow that everybody uses and it's perfect. Even for a person, different projects might require different workflows. But here, let me give you some kind of things to think about in terms of workflow. I like this chart from this website here. It was posted on this website here. It's a nice large version of it here. So step one, research. Understand your users, maybe interview them, talk to people that are doing the research, creating the brand. You create user personas, which are kind of these ideas of who the typical types of users are. So you can actually create like Kathy, Bob, whatever it is, and say, well, Kathy would like this, or Bob would like this, and they are, one's a mom, one's an executive, or whatever it is, and these things are important to this person because of this issue. Or here's a person that has vision impairment. Sue is vision impaired, so she needs to have the website read to them. So you kind of think, who's the different types of users, what's important to them, and create a strategy about, based on what's important, what's going to be the flow through the website or the app. How they're going to go from here to there, and like, how is it going to work, right? The strategy for how the content flow is, how the what's on different pages, that type of stuff. So it's really the strategy planning part of the site or the app. And then finally, you get into the design part, where you create maybe a sitemap of listing the different pages. You can create some prototypes. They could be low fidelity in the beginning, just to kind of block out where stuff is and how the user flows will work, kind of really think about how that initial design is going to work. And then you might test that. Even if it's something that's a preliminary prototype that's very low fidelity, just to kind of block out what's going to be where and what's it going to be like to use the thing before it looks nice and pretty. You could test that in front of users and see if they're getting it. And then if they're not, go back and revise it and make some changes before you do tight visual design. So the idea is that this is a kind of an iterative design process. You iterate on each version of it and just keep improving it and keep improving it and keep improving it until you get something that is a final, tighter design. And then you implement it and create it and you launch it, and then you test to see if on the final audience, once it's launched, how's it working? Are you getting people coming back? Are people coming to the page and leaving and not being converted? You look at all those things and think, okay, well, if I'm getting a lot of people coming and leaving, why is that? Is there something I can do about that, and see if you get your bounce rates down? If you're not converting very well, but you're getting a lot of people, then maybe there's something you can do to try to convert them better. So basically, get to know your users, plan things out, start to do your design, test it on people, come back and refine the design, launch it, and test it on final users. General idea process to think about for a project. So when you first approach that project, getting ready to get into it, I think getting your real content and real information as much as possible early on is really going to help, because you need to understand this thing that you're building. What's its purpose? What's it trying to do? Let's say you're redesigning an established site. Look at what's working, what's not working. Why are we redesigning this? Do we just want an aesthetic change? Normally not. They don't just want an aesthetic change. They want some content change. They want to sell a new product. They want to change their focus. What's working, what doesn't work? If it's a brand new site, well, what's the purpose? What's the revenue source? Like, why does this exist? How am I trying to get people to subscribe, people to buy something? How are people going to make money? If it's a brand new startup and they need to show some stakeholders to get investments, early on there's going to be some cool feature they need to show right away, but maybe there's a bigger part to the app or the website that can be developed later, but what's the initial thing that I need to concentrate on first? Like, what's my first priority? Let me do that first. Learn about your users, or whether they're existing users or people you're going to target, people you think are going to be the potential users if it's something that's new that hasn't been launched yet. And gather the real content as early as possible. Sometimes when clients are getting into a project, they haven't even collected their stuff. They don't know the photography and the copy, and they don't have this stuff together. And so you have to start to help them collect this stuff. They're going to need it eventually, and the sooner they get it together, the better. And so you need to see how much content, if you're going to design some big, beautiful cover image that is going to be full screen, and then you realize all their imagery is horrible and would never look good full screen, then all of a sudden now your design changes. So the earlier you can get real content and realize, oh, I need to go out and shoot photography or purchase stock photography, the earlier you know that, the better for your design. So you don't design something that will not be able to be produced. Once you start to understand who you're doing this for, why you're doing this, you start to wireframe and prototype. Wireframing is kind of thinking at like a sketch kind of level of putting down where content's going to go and what priority it's going to be in. So what's going to go first, what's going to go second, what's going to go third, what things should stand out from other things. And you can do these things in black and white. They don't have to have the real imagery. You can block out an area just to say, hey, let's put an image here. I don't have the image, but let's just block out an image to go there. So you're really trying to think through, like, do you have all the content where is it going to be in the right place? What are the calls to actions? Like, okay, we want people to do this here. And what's your hierarchy? So what's most important? I need to make that obvious. What's kind of needs to be there but is not quite as important? The information architecture. So this goes to site navigation. I want to think about that early on because site navigation is going to change how the users flow through the site. Oh, they're going to click here and then go to this page. So somebody needs to think through the site navigation. Now that might be a simple architecture, or it might be a complex one depending on the site. It might be a single page site with just 3 sections, or it might be a big site with tens of thousands of pages. And are the user flows working well? So from the home page, if somebody comes there and they click through to something, are they flowing through properly? What if they do a search and they land on a product or a service page? What are they going to see and where are they going to go next? Thinking about the flow of people through the site. And that's where things like prototyping come in, because you can make clickable prototypes, even if they're low fidelity things that don't look great, but they just have the content there. And some of it could be placeholder content, although it's best if it's not placeholder text. You don't need the actual photos. You can just say product photo goes here and make clickable prototypes so people can actually maybe test it and go through, click, 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 and see like, okay, yeah, I was able to check out, or I have no idea what I'm supposed to do here. I'm confused. You need to help me out. A lot of our classes can be done in person in New York City or live online. Some of the design classes are more experiential learning and need to be done in potentially groups, or we kind of need to see how people are working. So things like our user experience in a day or the longer user experience fundamentals, those need to be taken here in New York City. You can't just attend online because you can't interact with the other people in the classroom. Same thing with visual design for web and mobile. It's a great class that we have here, but really it's by us seeing you work and being able to give feedback and talk to you and help you work through things. It's really something that you really kind of have to be here in person to do. Some of the other classes we have you can do online, but these particular design classes really are for being in person here in New York City. And these are all links to our different class pages that we have. Now, choosing a design app, and this is where we're going to start to get in just a moment to some demos where I can show you using some of the design tools and kind of doing some of this stuff like creating your graphics and creating some prototypes and that type of stuff. So how do you choose the design app that you're going to use? You really have to think about what is it that you want to create. You can have wireframes, prototypes, high fidelity visuals. You don't have to think about doing it all in a single app. If you want to do a wireframe, the app you use to do wireframes might be different than the one that you use to create your high fidelity visuals. That's okay, because a wireframe is very early stage, get your thinking out quickly. Some people like to do wireframing and prototyping with paper, and then eventually they go onto the computer. Whatever gets your flow out fast, your flow of ideas, that's what you should use. So there's tons of design apps, and there's even more of them coming out. It's really, as more people focus on user experience design and visual design for web and apps, they're even creating new applications that are coming out all the time. So try not to be overwhelmed by all the different things. There's a lot of overlap across all the different apps. They often have some particular thing that they do well, but there's also a lot of times common overlaps. The main thing is that whatever app you're deciding to use, you want to be able to design quickly with it and get your ideas out, because you want to just get your ideas out as quickly as possible so that you can see what they are, see if they're any good. If they're not, scrap it, do something different, change it, whatever it is. If you're spending a lot of time fighting with the tool and it's not letting you get your thoughts out, then it's not working for you. And you don't have to find a single app that does everything. You don't have to do from wireframe and prototyping all the way through visual design. It's okay to use different applications that can work together. It doesn't have to be all in one app. That's kind of a panacea ideal thing, if we could someday, but it's not a requirement. So some of the most popular design apps that are out there are Photoshop, Sketch, and Vision. So Photoshop, you can do your design. You could do wireframing and design in Photoshop. You cannot do prototyping in Photoshop, although it does integrate with InVision. So InVision does prototyping. So with InVision, you can design in Photoshop or Sketch, which is another different application, and then take it into InVision and do your prototypes. I'll be showing you a little bit with InVision in just a moment. So Sketch is made by a different company than Adobe. It's not an Adobe product, and you can use that to do your designs. I'll be showing you a little bit about Photoshop and Sketch today. So you can design with Sketch. Now, as of right now, there's no built-in tools for prototyping directly in Sketch. It does integrate very well with InVision. Now, InVision's making a plugin for Sketch called Craft. And as part of Craft, which you can get today, they have all sorts of cool features, but one of them is in beta. It's a private beta right now. I do actually have the beta version, so I can show you how this works. But there's going to be a prototyping component to Craft, and that's going to be eventually released. I'm not sure when they're going to be done finishing the prototyping side of Craft, but that Craft plugin that you can get today does all sorts of cool things, but the public version is not going to include prototyping yet. Eventually, in some future update, they'll enable prototyping for everybody. So the beta version that I'm showing you, that I will be showing you today, will have the prototyping, but you can't get that publicly available yet. And that's going to enable you to do prototyping directly in Sketch. The only kind of caveat for that is it's focused on app prototyping, not website prototyping, from everything that I can tell, because you have to preview it on your mobile device. And you can't preview it on your desktop. So it really focuses on app prototyping versus websites. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. Hopefully in the future, they will open it up to do web prototyping and not just apps. But if you want to do web prototyping, instead of doing Craft right in Sketch, you could take your Sketch files into InVision and just use InVision, and you can do your web prototypes with InVision. So it doesn't have to be done directly in Sketch. Now, Adobe Experience Design, or XD, as Adobe is calling this, XD is a new design tool that they're creating from scratch, and it really is targeted at Sketch and InVision being put together in a single design app. There's currently a beta release that you can get if you're a Creative Cloud subscriber, and for anybody that's on the Creative Cloud, you can download it for free right now, and you can design and prototype in a single app. It's a beta version. It's been created from scratch, so it's still gaining a lot of features. There's still a lot of things that aren't there yet. It's got a bunch of cool things. I'll show you this in a little bit. It's got a bunch of cool features, but I would say that for production work, if you're doing simple little designs, you could probably start to use it. But for more complex designs, you're going to find that it is it's lacking in more features. And so eventually, though, I think as they finish out the feature set, once this eventually becomes like a final release product, I think it's going to be a really good design tool because you can design and prototype all in a single app, and they seem to have a good idea of how this app should work. So definitely keep an eye on it, and it's a cool up and coming Adobe app that people are starting to take notice of and starting to use. So when you're using those design tools, let's say you're designing in Photoshop or in Sketch. We typically, for websites, like to design on a grid, and Bootstrap, if I go to getbootstrap.com, Bootstrap is a framework that is for web developers. They're going to code. And the main thing in here is that there's a CSS, which is your cascading style sheets. It's how you style things on a website. They have a grid. And their grid is a 12-column grid. Why design on a 12-column grid? Well, let's say we look at the 12-column grid here. It's not that we're going to break things into individual columns within a 12-column grid, but we're going to span columns. So, for example, if you have 12 columns in total, if you can add 6 plus 6, you add up to 12 total columns. But 6 columns on the left, 6 columns on the right, you really have 2 columns that you are using in your design. So when you make an area, you're going to tell it to span a certain number of columns. If you spanned all 12 columns, you'd have something the full width of the page. If you only span 8 columns, that's 2/3 of the page. If you span 4 columns, it's 1/3 of the page. And the idea here is that we can build kind of consistency across pages using this consistent grid, but that fundamentally most designs are broken down into 2, 3, or 4 columns. And you can evenly divide 12. You could divide 12 in half, 6 and 6. You could divide it in 3, 4, 4, and 4. And you could divide it by 4, 3 and 3, and then 3 and 3. So you can do your 4 columns, your 3 columns, and your 2 columns, which are very common across websites. And that's why we typically do a 12-column. If you did a 10-column grid, you could divide it in half, but you couldn't evenly divide it in thirds or in quarters even. So they have specific sizes for all their stuff. At certain screen sizes, there's certain widths for the columns and the gutters between. So I have made templates for both Photoshop and Sketch. I have not made one for Adobe XD yet because they don't have guides in Adobe XD yet. Eventually, once they do add guides, then if they don't include a Bootstrap grid, I will create one for XD, but I'm waiting for XD to get guides. Until then, I can't really create this. So those are downloadable from my website. You can click on those links to download them. I've already downloaded those here. So let me show you here briefly how you would design on a grid if you're using Photoshop or Sketch. Here is the Sketch grid. So here is the mobile size, and I didn't know what people would want if they'd want to design on 6, 3, 2, or 1, so I gave them all of those. If you don't want some of those, you could just select them and delete the ones that you don't want. It's up to you. And then there's tablets, medium devices, and large devices. The medium and the large are the desktop size. I typically don't design on this size, so a lot of times I just delete that. And I typically will, this is just explanation if you want to learn more, but I typically go on like a large device desktop, a tablet, and I might get something like this one here for your phone. And the idea is that that Bootstrap grid has your 12 columns, and the gutter in between those columns is always the same. So the columns themselves just get smaller on smaller devices. If you're going to create content like type, you would start typing in here. I should have put some spaces in there. There we go. And if I want to make that 3 columns, it just snaps to the guides. In Sketch, they have a layout that you can hide and show. So they have a specific grid just for these types of guides. And so content goes gray box to gray box with the idea that if you have multiple contents here, that you want that space in between. So if you have multiple columns, one text here, this is the space in between because you don't want your text touching each other. If you're going to do backgrounds, then you want to show your rulers. And in Sketch, when you show the rulers, I have these red column guides that do the in-betweens. So say you're going to put a colored background behind something. Let's hide the layout grid there. You could draw a rectangle. And let's say you want to do a background color. There you go, red guide to red guide. Let's say I do black, arrange, send to back, oops, move to back. Say I select this type, make that white. And then let's say you want to do another rectangle over here, and that one's going to be a gray background. If I hide the rulers, background to background, those touch each other, but the type doesn't touch each other. So the in-between guides, those are for backgrounds. And the layout, gray guide to gray guide, those are for content. Okay. Same exact thing, same concept for Photoshop. I like to work in high-res files, which are called 2x Retina. We'll talk more about that in a moment. I'm going to open up the 3 main sizes. And we don't need to add stuff to the library, so we'll just cancel that. There is a file that has all 4 sizes like the Bootstrap one had, but I typically just use these 3 main sizes. So this template only has the 3 main sizes. It's the same kind of idea here that you can work on these. It's just that instead of having 2 separate things, all your guides are shown all at the same time. And Photoshop doesn't have that kind of easy to hide and show column guide. So we had to make this a layer that you hide and show. And that's just a bunch of rectangular boxes that we've drawn in Photoshop. If you're doing content, once again, you go from gray box to gray box. I'm going to fill this with some lorem ipsum. I'm going to make this bigger, like so. I'm going to option drag a copy of that. So content, gray box to gray box. You skip the gutter in between. If you're drawing backgrounds, you go to midpoint columns like so. And I could put that underneath my type like so. And I could change this type over here to white. Okay. So they're not color coded like they are in Sketch, but you still have those midpoint columns that if you're doing backgrounds, you draw your backgrounds to those midpoints. And then if you don't want to see those guides, you can go and you can hide your guides. And there's the layer that you can use to hide the columns, like so. Similar kind of grids work essentially the same way, just a little bit different between Photoshop and Sketch as far as which features you use to work within those. All right. So those are all free to download templates that you can use for doing your designs. I think now is actually the perfect time to take a 5-minute stretch break. If you need to go use the restroom, go grab a drink or something. I'm going to put up a 5-minute timer. We will continue in 5 minutes with some more cool stuff, and I'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, so breaks over, back to the action. Okay, yeah, so the live demo part was what I was already doing. Let's go back in and continue with some more stuff in Photoshop here. So I mentioned that there was two versions of my template, Retina and non-Retina, so 1x and 2x. So let's go over that whole idea of working in Photoshop. So Photoshop has no understanding of the vector nature of the web and kind of how Retina stuff works. So it gets a little bit trickier. Let me close this actually. Let's start in Sketch actually. It's a little bit easier to understand in Sketch. I'm going to create a new file in Sketch and insert an artboard. On the right hand side, I can choose, let's say, an iPhone SE, which would be the same as the iPhone 3, 4, 5 in terms of pixel dimensions for coding a web page. So the iPhone, actually, it wouldn't go all the way back. It was a little bit taller than the original iPhone. But let's talk about the width here. So 320 pixels is the iPhone SE. That's the same as the iPhone 4. Really, that never changed from the original iPhone all the way through the iPhone 5. They were all considered 320 pixels as far as coding goes when we code on the web. So the thing you have to understand about Retina, I'll show this again here. I'm going to open up this little diagram that I have. Try to get this at a good size. I have to do a custom zoom here. Oh, actually, let me hide that so I can zoom in a little bit more. There we go. Okay. Okay, so let's say you take a Retina image. And let's just say that this, you take a low-res image and a high-res image. 1x image and a 2x image. So that low-res image, let's say it's 320 pixels. And you put it on the original iPhone, which was actually 320 pixels. Then you compare it to the later iPhones, which became Retina. When Apple calls it Retina, really what they mean is within the same physical space, they doubled the amount of hardware pixels that are in that space. So every pixel got cut into half, vertically and horizontally. So there are now 4 pixels that occupy the same space that used to be occupied by 1 pixel. So every pixel got cut in half, horizontally and vertically. So there's twice the width and twice the height, but it occupies the same physical space. And that's why instead of seeing more, as in like a bigger display, we now see more detail for the first time when Apple created their high-res Retina displays. We call them 2x because they doubled the amount of hardware pixels in the same space. So it's twice the width, twice the height. So if you take a low-res image that's actually 320 pixels, and you put it onto a 1x device, which is 320 pixels, it looks exactly like you'd expect. When you put it on a 2x device, even though the hardware has twice the capability at showing even finer detail, because your image is low res, it does not look any better. This is assuming that the type is, or the art is actually pixel based. The image is going to look the same on a low res and a high res device because the image we're giving it is low res. Now, if you give it another image that is twice the width and twice the height, notice there's a lot more detail in here. The NYC is sharper. Notice that I've compared these two images at the same pixel size. If you look at the size of one of these pixels, they're the same size. So because we have twice as many pixels, the bottom image looks twice as wide and twice as tall. The only thing is that we don't view 2x or Retina images at twice the physical size. No, we squeeze them into the same physical space. So what happens is if you scale this image down to occupy the same physical space as the 1x, all those pixels shrink so they're half the size. And that means that if you take a 2x image and you throw it on a 1x device, even though there's additional detail there, you're not going to be able to see it because the 1x is limited by its hardware. It's like trying to put a color image on a black and white screen. The image is color, but you're not going to see it because you're physically limited by the output of the screen. The screen cannot show color, even if it's in the original file. That happens on e-readers like the Kindle. If you have a Kindle tablet, which is a color device, you see your ebooks in color. But if you see them on the e-ink version of it, that's a black and white display. The same color file doesn't show color. It gets converted to grayscale. Now, if you take that 2x image and you display it on a 2x device, then since your original source image has additional detail, then you can see it on that 2x device. So we now have to create images which have twice the width and twice the height compared to the images we used to have to create. They get scaled to occupy the same physical space, and anybody that has a high-res device will see the benefit. People that do have an old low-res device don't see the benefit. And so the downside of that is that they actually get to download a bigger file and they get no benefit for it. So it takes longer to load the web page and it doesn't look any better. So in an ideal world, we would supply a 1x and a 2x, and then we code the web page so that it will automatically choose the 1x for low-res screens and the 2x for high-res screens. Now that's how we started doing the web, as there was a combination of low-res and high-res screens. But for the most part now, on mobile, basically everybody has a high-res screen, and they have for a number of years. So I see more and more websites only coding in 2x device size images because there's hardly anybody on a mobile device that still has a 1x screen. And so some people are now saying, hey, let's just do everything as 2x images and let's not bother with a 1x. Yeah, in an ideal world, we'd create the 1x and 2x, but it's extra code, it's extra work. So some people are just skipping it and doing only Retina images. Because at some point, when there are no low-res screens out there, why bother making low-res images for low-res screens if nobody has low-res screens? If everybody has high-res, why not just make all the graphics high-res? That's the thought process. So it's kind of a matter of when we switch over to just Retina graphics. Now, when you do Retina graphics, it's really important to properly compress your images, because otherwise these files, they're twice the width and twice the height, so they could be almost 4 times the file size if you're not careful about compressing your images properly. Okay, so for example, let's say you're going to take your image, and let's open this JPEG up here in Photoshop. Let's just say you want to go full screen for a desktop, and you want to do a Retina version of it. Let me click up here in Photoshop and go into image size. Right now, this image is 4,248 pixels in size. Did I say 42? 5248. That's huge. We don't need that. Right now, I am streaming in Retina quality, which is effectively, this is a 1,440 pixel screen, but it's Retina. So instead of 1440, it's really double that. So that's 2880. So some people are going to have 2880 pixel screens. Now, let's say your average desktop is more like 12 to 1300 pixels. You don't have to be exact full-on Retina like the 2880, not inches, pixels. Make sure you're in pixels there. You got to make sure resample's checked. Leave it at 72 pixels per inch. That's fine. That's irrelevant on the web. What all I care about here is the pixel dimensions. That's what I care about. You could do something like 2880, but if you think about the file size, you might not need to go full 2880. Let's say people more commonly have a 13-inch, sorry, not a 13-inch, a 1300 pixel screen. If it's 1300 pixels Retina, that'd be 2600 instead of 2880. So the 2600, it's close to being pixel perfect for Retina screens, but a little bit smaller, so we'll save a little bit of file size. You just have to be close. If you did only the 1300, then people on a Retina screen, it won't look as good. It still will be serviceable. It will look okay. It just won't look as sharp. Anything beyond 1300 pixels is just going to continue to look better the higher you go. But if you go to like 4000 pixels in size, once that's scaled down to fit your screen, you don't see anything beyond the 2880 pixels for an example of a 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro. So you really have to balance file size with quality. How much quality do you really need? You know, even something like 2000 pixels, it's better than 1x. It's not full 2x quality, but it's still going to look pretty darn good. So depending on how many images you have on the page, you might have to balance exactly how high res you want to go. If it's the only image on the page and you want it to look beautiful and you really need all that detail, maybe you want to go with something like 2600 pixels. But it's not an exact, like, I can tell you all the time, make your images this size. It really depends on how much you have on the page, how many other files you're loading. Just know that anything beyond 1x is going to look better. And on desktops, not as many people have Retina screens. Some people do, but on desktops, the norm is low-res screens. So if you're doing desktop images, you definitely should be doing 1x and 2x images. So let's say we do 2600 pixels, and that's going to be the Retina version of this. We're going to assume that 1300 pixels will be 1x and 2600 will be 2x. So if I view this at 100% or actual pixels, I'm on a Retina screen, and we can see that it basically fills up almost, if I get rid of my things over there on the right, basically almost fills up my screen. Looks really nice. We can now export that for the web. You can do that as either save for web or export as. Either one works. Let's do export as. Export as is a bit newer in the newer versions of Photoshop. I'm going to choose JPEG over here. Now, you don't want to go too high quality with this. At 100% quality, it's going to look nice. If I zoom in here to 100% to see this, it's going to look really nice, but it's going to be over here on the left, 2.8 megs. That's huge. We don't need to be that high quality. Now, if you go down to 0% quality, you're at 83K. And believe it or not, now I know that this is going to be compressed with the video, and especially the live stream, might change the quality. But believe it or not, this does not look horrible for 0% quality. When you consider the difference between that and that, depending on your streaming quality, you might not even be able to tell the difference. I can tell a difference when I'm looking at this normally on my Retina screen. I can tell a difference in the smoothness, like in the handles here. Let me zoom in so you guys can see this. And this is a pretty noisy image, which is going to increase the file size quite a bit. See, that does look a lot worse when you're really low quality. So you probably don't want it to look that bad. But you don't need it to be that big. So you're trying to find the sweet spot in the middle. You're trying to go as low as you can get away with. And normally for Retina images, I'm below 50%. You can compress the heck out of these high-res images because the most important thing you have is the resolution, all those pixels. The quality doesn't throw away as much as you might think it does. So I will often go to like 30%. It depends on the image and the complexity of the image. Sometimes you have to go to 50%. Sometimes you can get down to 20%. Like in this case, 29% I think is still doing pretty decent. See if I can go even lower. This image, because it's so blurry, and there's not a lot of sharp detail, I can get away with really low quality. I think I can get away with 20% on this. And we're down to 151K. For a full screen Retina image, if you compress these things well, you can really have them be quite small. Okay. Let me export this to my desktop, and I'll call this coffee at 2x. So I remember that this is the 2x version of this. Need an extra E in there. If you're exporting the 1x, you can do your image size here, or you can also do it when you're exporting. We can cut this down to 1300 pixels now right here. This will be the 1x. Now at 1x, you have to go with better quality. The reason is because 2x is going to effectively be shrunk in half when you view it. And that means that all the ugly things that might come out when you compress with JPEG artifacts, you get blockiness. In the 2x, they're going to become half the size. But in a 1x, we're not going to get that reduction because we display it at normal size. We don't squeeze it into half the size of our web page. So you have to go with a higher quality with a 1x JPEG. You don't have to go with super high quality, but you do have to go with a higher quality than 2x. A lot of times I would say just double your 2x quality. So if I was at 20, I would start at 40 and just see. Now, the only reason I can get away with something this low on this image is because it's mostly blurriness and there's very little detail. Most JPEGs, I have to go with something of a higher quality. In fact, 40 might be even a little bit low for this image. Most of the time I find that it's kind of 1x images are above 50%, and 2x images are below 50%. So that's kind of a divider line. And so I'm at 131K, but the 2x was only 150. So yeah, maybe I can go a little bit lower on this image. Maybe I get that down to 100. So 100K versus 150, I mean, that is a third of the file size. But depending on the image, your 2x might not be that much bigger than the 1x if you optimize them properly. So I will call this one I just call coffee. If there's no 2x, I assume it's not Retina. So now if I go to my desktop, 104 versus 154, that is a decent difference. And for desktop users, this will download in 2/3 of the time. So I think it's worth, especially for desktop users, doing both 1x and 2x, and then letting it be coded in to the web page so that it will automatically detect which one they can get, and then it'll only download the one that they need. Beyond that, you also want to use tools to further compress your images. On the Mac, you can use a free tool called ImageOptim. It's a free app that you can get online. Just Google ImageOptim. And it really compresses things like PNGs or GIFs really well. JPEGs, it might save a little bit. You can drop it on there. It saved like 6 or 7%. ImageOptim is a free app that it can compress PNG, GIF, or JPEG. There's another similar app called Image Optimize for Windows, but that's like $27 to purchase. There's sometimes websites that you can also use as well that do similar types of things. If you have a Mac and you can get ImageOptim, it's, in my opinion, it's the best one that's out there because it handles all the different file types. It's all non-destructive. It does not hurt your images. It just reduces the file size. And JPEGs, you typically don't save that much, but a lot of times it's only maybe like 2 to 3%, but it did save me, in this case, like 6 or 7%. So that's pretty good because the files you get out of Photoshop or Illustrator just aren't quite as small as they potentially could be. And running it through third-party optimizing tools like this can shrink it even further. So now I got down to 144 or 96. So that's pretty good. Okay. If you're in Sketch, when you're working, actually, let me finish back up in Photoshop for a second. Okay, so when you're working in Photoshop in 2x, so now we see an image here. No, sorry, let's go back to desktop here. Seminar files. Okay, so I've got 1x and 2x. Let's look at the difference here between these two files. Okay, so when we look at this, the 1x is 320 pixels. The 2x is 640. So in Photoshop, you have to make your file sizes twice as big. Now, unfortunately, that means that as you design in Photoshop, all the things that are pixel-based, like type sizes, and let me switch my preferences over, actually, because I see that my type is not in pixels. Let's go to General. Let's see, what is this? This is units. I'm going to switch type over to pixels. I'll switch my rulers over to pixels as well. All right. So when we're doing our type size, let's say I say hello here and change that to black. If I make this, let's make this 30 pixels. Look at how big that is here. It's almost 2 columns. But if I do the same thing here, see, Photoshop doesn't know retina pixels versus non-retina pixels. If I do the same hello at 30 pixels, now notice how it's barely bigger than 1 column. So everything you do in a Photoshop 2x file has to be 2 times the size. So instead of 30 pixels, I have to be at 60 pixels. The 60 pixels versus the 30, they will end up being the same appearance. But you have to type in 60 pixels. When this is coded into the web page, though, you have to cut it back in half. In the web page, it has to be coded as 30 pixels. That's the unfortunate thing about working in a 2x file in Photoshop. They just don't understand that 30 pixels in code have to be translated into hardware, that if there's twice as many pixels of hardware, it has to tell your 30 pixel CSS to become 60 pixels in hardware. Or if it's on a 3x, the 30 pixels will become 90 pixels in the hardware. Photoshop doesn't understand this idea. So we have to double everything, unfortunately. Sketch does understand that idea. In Sketch, when you have a new file and you have an artboard, everything you see in Sketch is talking 1x code sizes, but it's a vector program. So we can see it in retina quality, and we can type in 30 pixels, and that would actually be 30 pixels. So if we said hello, kind of see the same kind of similar size. We say 30 pixels. On my hardware, on my screen, it's going to use 60 pixels to render that. So I'm seeing this at retina quality. It looks great. When I look at this as actual size, this looks beautiful on my retina screen. It's properly sized. It's proper quality. In Photoshop, when I'm in my 2x file, I can view this as 100%. It looks beautiful, looks good, but unfortunately the type sizes end up being doubled to 60 pixels. If I was in a 1x file, this isn't going to work well on my screen when I go to actual size, the 100%. It's going to be too small. Notice how the other size, everything is bigger, a more appropriate size. The reason for that is the 1x file is low res, but I'm on a high res screen. Being that I'm on a high res screen, I have to zoom in to 200%. Now it's going to look a little pixelated, but that kind of makes sense, because if you're in a low res file, viewing it on a high res screen, that means you're going to see those pixels. So whenever your files match, like if you're on a 1x screen with a 1x file, 100% is going to be a trustworthy size. If I'm on a 2x screen with a 2x file, 100% is going to be a trustworthy file. It's when they don't match that you have to zoom in or zoom out. So I recommend designing in 2x files. If you're on a retina screen, you can trust your 100% size. It's going to be the trustworthy size. If you're viewing the 2x file on a low-res screen, if you still have a low-res screen that you're designing on, this will be twice as big as you really want it to be. So you're going to have to zoom out to 50% when you're designing. It won't look better, but the extra quality will be there when you're designing. And eventually you're going to get a retina screen. It's just a matter of when you're going to get a retina screen. It's like now you can't get a black and white display. Nobody wants a black and white display. So eventually, once everything goes high res, you're going to eventually get a high res display. It's just a matter of when you're going to get that, not will you get that. When you want to export varieties of assets, let's say I go here, for example, in Sketch. Let's say I want to export this particular photo. In Sketch, I can export that by going down here to the Make Exportable, clicking the plus, and saying I want a JPEG. If I want a 2x version, I can switch that. If I want both, I can click plus again, and I can create the 2x JPEG like so. And you can mark as many different things for export as you want. Name your layers how you want your file names to be. It'll add the @2x for the 2x version. You go through, and then when you're done, you can click the export at the top right, and you can see all the things that have been made exportable. I don't need my artboards here. I just want my masthead photo. Let's export this to the desktop. And we see the masthead photo there and the 2x version. Now, let's say you want to export vector graphics like this. Whenever we're doing logos or icons, we don't want to be using pixel-based versions of these for our websites. We want to be creating vector versions. So for that, you would make it exportable as an SVG file, scalable vector graphics. We should be using these on our websites for any sort of vector iconography or logos. I'm going to click the export button just to export this one individual item. And I'll put that on my desktop, and that'll create an SVG version. We don't have to worry about 1x and 2x for our SVG versions because it's vector. It'll always look great and crisp on every size screen because it's vector. It doesn't matter how much we zoom in, it's always looking sharp. Same thing in a web page. You can now use this at any size in a web page, and it will always look beautiful, crisp, and clean. You can do a similar thing in Photoshop. I'll take the same kind of design that I have in Photoshop. Let's say I want to export the photo that I have here. Let's take a look at the layers panel. It's a little bit of a different process for Photoshop. There are a variety of ways you can export things, but in my opinion, probably the best way, the most useful way, is by naming your layers. We can use something called Adobe Generator to generate the assets based on your layer names. So if this is just called hero, image, masthead, whatever you want, Photoshop will not export a graphic for that. But what we can do is we can say, in my design right now, I designed this at 2x. So that's the current size for this design. I'm going to say this is at the current size, exported, name it hero at 2x. That's not going to change the size or anything. That's just the name of the file. I say, make it a JPEG. The default, I believe, is 80% quality. So let's say I want to make this 30% quality. Unfortunately, you can't preview it, but we can look at it afterwards once we've exported it. So you do have to guess initially and then see what it does. I don't just want a 2x. I want to also get a 1x. So I'm going to say comma, type in the same file name for hero. I want a JPEG, but the 1x should be higher quality because it needs to be for the 1x. So I can set the name and the quality for each one, and it'll export both of those assets from the same layer. Scaling down is never a problem. However, if you're designing at 1x and scaling up, there can be issues with some smart objects in Photoshop. If it was ever a JPEG originally before you brought it in, like if it was a JPEG that you placed, doing a file place to create a smart object, then those will not upscale. They downscale just fine. But that's just another reason why I recommend designing at 2x, because scaling down is never a problem, and sometimes scaling up is. Now I'm going to turn on Adobe Generator to turn on this asset generator that's going to create these assets. Now, before I do that, let's just take a look at where this file is saved and watch what Photoshop is going to do. In this folder, there are just Photoshop documents right now. This is where it's saved. I'm working out of this file. Now let's turn on the asset generator. So Adobe Generator is now working behind the scenes to look at my layer names and export based on those layer names. It created a folder and it exported. Now I've named other layers, so it did export the things that I wanted to, as well as other things that I had already named. So if I look at some of my other layer names down here, for example, in the footer, in the social icons, I had already named those to be exported as PNG. Now, for things like these icons, ideally we would not be using PNGs unless this is going into an HTML newsletter where we do have to use pixel-based graphics. SVGs don't work well in emails. They do work very nicely on the web, so if we were doing this as a web page, I really should not be exporting these things as PNGs. I really should be exporting those things as vector SVG files. Same thing with this logo. That's fine for an HTML email, but not fine for a web page. So let's say we go in here to this logo, and let's say we tell it to export an SVG. I need to do hipster logo .png. .svg. Let's go to my desktop here and look for an SVG file. And when I look at it, I don't know if you can tell, but this looks a little pixelated. Photoshop screwed this up. This is a vector smart object that I copied and pasted from Illustrator. It cannot export this properly. It looks like an SVG file, but if you open that up in your code editor, you'll notice that they embedded a PNG image into the SVG file. Kind of like a PDF can have pixel-based or vector-based graphics in a PDF, the same thing is true of SVG. They can contain vector or pixel-based art all in the same file. And so Photoshop just cannot export SVG unless it's native to Photoshop. Like type that's native can be exported. Vector shapes drawn in Photoshop can be exported properly to SVG. But if it's a vector smart object from Illustrator, not going to export to SVG properly, unfortunately. So don't do that in don't do that in Photoshop. Do that in Illustrator. We're just a double click away from Illustrator. So if you want to export an SVG of this the right way, double click. That's going to go to Illustrator so you can make changes. We're going to click OK. If you get this thing about changes, just keep the changes. That's okay. We just want to make sure that this thing looks proper. All right, so here we have the logo in Illustrator. If the artboard is too big, let's say you have something like this. If you export the SVG, it will contain all of that empty space. And when you plop it into the page, you're going to have empty space around your vector shape. You don't want that. You want to crop down to just the art itself. If this is not grouped, you want to select everything and group it first. And then here's a great little tip to learn today. Use your artboard tool to double click in the art, and it will snap your artboard to the size of whatever you double clicked on. That's why you want to group it first, because if you double click on an individual object, it'll snap the artboard size to that individual object. Group the whole thing and then double click on it with your artboard tool, and it'll snap to the exact size you need. Now we can export an SVG file. Now if you're on an older version of Illustrator, you might not have file export as for SVG. You might only have save as with SVG. It'll end up fundamentally working the same way, but you might have to go to save as to find your SVG. If you have, I think it's was first added in CC 2015. If you have CC 2015 or later, you'll have it under export as. The export as is a little bit better nowadays compared to the older save as. You should get a smaller file size that downloads faster. Still decent if you have the old version. You can save as an SVG, but a little bit better if you have the export as SVG. In Illustrator, the main option that you need to pay attention to, and this is under the save as or the export, it doesn't matter which one you're using, is uncheck responsive. Now, normally responsive is good when you're making a website. You want things to be responsive, which means to adapt to different size screens. You don't want your SVG files to be responsive. That means if you check on responsive, there will be no width and height coded into the file. That can create problems with browsers such as Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge. They want a width and height coded into the file for them to display properly. Most browsers won't have an issue if there's no width and height, but Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge might in certain cases. By coding in the width and height, by unchecking responsive, now it's going to code a width and height, but that is just initial, so that when you first bring it into the page, it's going to know how large you want it to be. And if you want it to be that size, you don't have to do anything else. If you want to change it, of course, you can write CSS to change the size of that. It's vector, so you can make it bigger or smaller, all you want. You can override those defaults, but you do want to have a default size coded in so that you get better browser compatibility. So if responsive is checked, it does not code a width and height in, that can create problems. Make sure you uncheck that and you'll have fewer browser problems. It doesn't limit you in any way. It just puts a default in and you can always override that default. Okay, and now you have a good SVG file. All right. Next, let's talk about some prototyping. Let's say you want to do some prototyping from Sketch or Photoshop. The easiest way to do that is to download the Craft plugin from InVision. So InVision is a web app, and there are a variety of different prototyping tools that you can use. I'm going to demonstrate InVision for right now. You can sign up for a free account and you get one project in your account for free. If you want multiple projects in your account, you have to pay, but you can get started free forever. You get one project for free, and then you can always delete that and start a new project. That's fine. But on here, you can download the Craft plugin if you Google, or the link is in the presentation that I gave you. But if you forget it, you can always Google InVision Craft. That'll take you right to the Craft page where you can download the plugin. Put in your email, get it for free. Though you'll download an installer, which will add this to your menu bar, and you can go to whichever program you want and click install. you're not going to have this prototype beta. You're going to be on the production side. You're not going to see this other thing. It's just because I have the private beta that includes the prototyping that I have a little bit more stuff here. But with the public release, you're going to have everything except the prototype. As part of Craft, they have this new thing. It's in beta testing right now. It's working pretty well, though, which is called Sync. It makes it a bit easier to sync your Photoshop art or your sketch art into InVision to do your prototyping. And they work essentially the same way, regardless of whether you're in Photoshop or in Sketch. So I will demonstrate this in Sketch. I'm going to open up a different file to do the prototyping on. So let's say I have a very simple prototype of 2 pages, and I want to make some clickable things that go from one page to another. Very simple web prototype. Over here is a sync panel. In Photoshop, the sync panel is under Window Extensions. You can get to sync that way if you're in Photoshop. But in Sketch, it's right over here. If you already have a prototype that you want to add it to, you can click on this and choose it. I don't have a prototype existing that I want to add it to, so I'm going to create a new one. So I click on that, and that opens up my web browser here. It was on my other screen, so I just had to move it over to this screen. So this is, I'm already logged into my account. Normally you'd have to log into your account, of which you can get a free one. This takes you to your projects page where you can create a project. You have to create the project on InVision's website. So you click the plus button. I want a new prototype for web that I'm going to call demo. Get started. All right. So now I have a demo prototype here. I can actually close this now. Now that I have that, I can come back and hit the refresh button. And now I can choose that demo prototype. And I'm going to click sync. And that's going to sync all of my artboards into my InVision project. Same thing in Photoshop. If you have your different artboards, it will sync those to your project. Then I can click open to go back to the InVision website. Let's pull this back over onto my main screen here. And so here I am in my demo prototype. And now I have my screens. That sync makes it super easy to get from your desktop, upload the stuff directly into your InVision project. Now I can view one of these screens. Down here at the bottom, we can preview, build, and do other things. I'm going to click to build mode. And I want this about button to go to the about page. So I'm going to drag a hotspot over it and then tell it that when I click it, I want to go to the about page. And it does a preview so I can see what that page looks like. So it'll go there when I click on it. Cool. Now I can preview that by going back to preview mode. And when I click on it, it goes to that page. And you can scroll through the page. Now let's go back to build mode. On this screen, I want to do a fixed header. So I check on fixed header. And I want this part of my page to always be on screen, and the content that's below will scroll underneath it. So I just mark that as a fixed header. I also want to do that on the home page as well. I want to also do a fixed header, like so. Now if I go to preview mode, the fixed header stays there as I scroll. And I can click on here. And again, the fixed header stays there as I scroll. So that's just a little bit of an idea of how quickly you can get started doing InVision. But the idea is that, let's say you want to make a change. You go back to Sketch. And let's say you want to say, instead of why hipstered, why choose hipstered. So you make some change. Maybe how the company got started. Any changes you make, you go back here, and then you click sync again. That resyncs your artboards. It still keeps all the work you've done in InVision. It just syncs the visual changes back to InVision. So then I go back to Safari here. I didn't have to do anything. I just came back, and it automatically updated. If I go switch back over to the home page, we'll notice that that updated as well. So all you have to do is hit the sync, come back to your web page, here in InVision, and it's automatically updating. Pretty cool stuff. Same process works in Photoshop now with the sync. Makes it so much easier than previous ways where you might have had to upload it or put your file in a certain folder on your desktop. So Sync makes it really easy to get your stuff into InVision to do further prototyping. Now, we can go a little bit further with the craft prototyping directly in Sketch. Now, this is where you have to have the private beta to get this feature, but I do want to show you a preview of it, so you can see what it looks like to do app prototyping directly in Sketch. So here I have an app. I'm going to hide the layer list on the left there. This is the main screen of the app. This is like learn more, can go over here. But then this menu, I want this menu to slide over so that this would be like an overlay on top of here when I click the menu button. So to get to craft, you hit C for craft to do the prototyping. I want to make it so that this button will go to this other page. So I hit C to bring up craft, and this little toolbar comes up, and I get this arrow that I can use to point to things. And then I can click on the other artboard to go to it. I want it to animate in, let's have it push from the right. I like that. It's going to push it over from the right. Yes. Now it says I must define an initial screen. Let's click on Define Initial Screen. Out of all of these three artboards, Menu, Home, and Learn, I want the first home screen to be Home. So it'll start there, and then it can go someplace else. I'm also going to name this prototype YouTube Live Stream. Okay. This, when I tap on it, I want to go back. So again, I hit C for craft. And I could aim at this, or there's a little back button that I can hit, and I hit that back button up there. And that's just going to know to go back. So it will reverse the animation, and it'll go back to wherever I originally came from. Now I want to see this. Let's do one more thing. Let's make this menu appear. When I tap on this, I want the menu to appear. So I'm going to hit C for craft, link it to this artboard. But this, I don't want to actually go to the artboard. I want this artboard to overlay the current one. So that's called a modal. A modal is going to appear as an overlay on top of the existing artboard. So this area right here does not have anything, so that's going to be transparent to show through to the rest of the page. If I want that area to be darkened or lightened, they call that a distractor. I can choose black with a bit of opacity. I could even tell it to blur the background if I wanted to. Let's just do an opaque, slightly opaque background black. So it'll darken the rest of the page so that I'll notice this even more. And I want that to animate in from the left. So it'll close to the right. It knows to automatically do that when it leaves. Cool. Let's hit Add Link. The final thing is I want to be able to close that with the close button. So I'll hit C for craft. And then up here in the special toolbar, there's an X, which is a close button. So I can choose that, and it will know to dismiss the modal and close it. All right. So now I've done all my prototyping here, and I want to see it actually work. And to do that, I need to go to my mobile device. Now, I have a way that I can bring up my mobile device here on the screen. Normally, you would just look at your iPhone. But let me just pull up my iPhone here up on the computer screen. Okay. So here on your mobile device, I believe this is available for Android and iOS. You can download the InVision app for free. So you go into the InVision app. You plug in by USB, or you can be on the same Wi-Fi network. And this is my computer here. I'm going to hit connect for that. Here it shows my prototype that I can tap on to go into it. And I want to go to a different screen here. Oh, I think it's because I'm just selecting that artboard over there. I want to select this artboard here. Whichever artboard you have selected in Sketch, that's the one that's going to be visible. So let me show you that. So here, if I just select the menu, it's going to show me that artboard. If I select this one, it's going to show me that one. I want to select this one, so it shows me that one. It's doing that because you can actually go in there and work on your design, and you see it update in real time. That's why they're doing that. Okay, so I want to be able to now experiment here on my iPhone, try out my actual prototype. So I'm going to tap on Learn More, and it goes to the Learn More page. I can tap on the logo, It goes back to that page, and here I can tap on the menu, and it will open up the menu, and then I can close it. Notice the distractor, it darkens up the rest of the page. So that's pretty cool that I could make a prototype that quick. I just wish that I could preview web prototypes, because I could just do that all on my Mac. Sketch is a Mac-only app, by the way. It does not run on Windows. So right now, the only way to preview these prototypes, as far as I know, is using the app on your iPhone or iPad, which really means it's for mobile experiences only. It could be a mobile website or an app, but it really, to preview desktop size web page designs, there's not a way to see it, and that's the only issue with Craft. I really like it, but it does seem to be more focused on app design, prototyping, than it is websites. So hopefully that'll change in the future. We'll have to see. I'm not sure what their focus is going to be. And I could be mistaken. I could just somehow missed how to do it, but I just haven't seen anything in all the stuff that I've read. It always seems to be focused on apps. Now, just to compare that, we have Adobe Experience Design. And with Adobe Experience Design, you can do design and prototyping all in a single app. So for example, I can go into this tutorial file here, and let's say I want to go from this homepage and I want to go over to the blog. So you can design this and prototype it all in the same app. Just click on this, and let's pull that off. You just drag that over to your artboard and say which way you want it to slide. Let's slide it left. You can then click preview to preview it here on your desktop, tap on it, and it slides over. It is more basic prototyping though. There is no modals, there's no fixed headers or footers. So while it's cool that you can design and prototype all in a single app, right now the design is more basic than Sketch, and the prototyping is more basic than InVision. So if you want more power, Sketch and InVision today is definitely going to be more powerful. But XD is a very early stage app, so I think that it's going to develop as time goes on, but we do have to wait for it to kind of get to the point where it is as powerful as Sketch and InVision together. Oh yeah, and somebody in the chat said, but Sketch is only for Mac, and yes, so that's the big. XD is for Mac and Windows. Right now, the Windows version is much farther behind the Mac because it's still in beta. Eventually, though, the Mac and PC versions will be equal to each other. XD is going to run on Mac and PC. Sketch, as far as they've said, Sketch is never going to be made for Windows. It's a Mac-only design app. Okay. So a lot of this stuff is just kind of reviewing things that we talked about. If you want to learn more, we've got a Photoshop for Web and UI class, a Sketch in a day, and an Adobe Experience Design in a day. Those can all be taken online or in New York City. Those you can attend online. There are a bunch of different design apps though. Axure, Balsamic, Just in Mind, Framer. Facebook now has their own one that they just released just recently. It's called Origami Studio. Origami Studio is that you design in Sketch and then you copy and paste into Origami Studio. With Origami Studio, you can create really complex animations and interactions well beyond what a lot of other prototyping apps let you do. This is how Facebook designs their Facebook app and Instagram and all of their mobile apps. Can do websites, although again, I do think that they're a little bit more mobile oriented, but this can do sites or apps equally well. And so there are a bunch of different design apps you can use. It's really just finding which tool is easy for you to use and which one has the features you need. Like if you need complex interactions, Origami Studio might be really good for you. But if you're on PC, it doesn't help you because I think Origami Studio is only for Mac because Sketch is only for Mac. So I think this is a whole Mac workflow. So for, if you're on Windows, then this whole option is not good for you. Framer, if you're good with JavaScript, you can do prototyping with code. You can do advanced prototyping with code. But if you're not so good with code, then Framer might not be as good for you. They're trying to help give things that will kind of do the code for you, but it's still fundamentally based on code. So really, it's a matter of just finding the app that works with whatever design apps you're using and is something that you can learn and use and has the features you need for your level of prototyping. Finally, do you really need to learn code? I think it helps. It enables you to better understand how sites work, what the best practices are, what you can design. You can communicate better with developers. You can better prepare your assets for the developers. And ultimately, it just gives you more control and insight over how things work. And it makes you more marketable. Knowing HTML and CSS is going to allow you to understand how all of these things work behind the scenes, and it gives you a skill that you can have on your resume. So I've never heard somebody that says, code hasn't advanced me somehow. People that know code, it's easier to get jobs, and people always say it's been helpful for me to learn code. It doesn't mean you're going to code all day long if you want to do mostly visual design, but it just makes you a better designer because you know how the stuff works. You just understand the medium that you're working within better. If you do want to learn more about code, we have classes you can take in person here in New York City or live online. We have a whole web design certificate if you really want to learn how to build web pages, or if you just want something that's more of a taste test. Intro to HTML and CSS gives you just a 3-hour introduction to let you know, hey, how does HTML and CSS work? Is it right for me? Am I going to be able to learn this? You can do that live in New York City or live online. And that's actually like the first 3 hours of our web development level 1 class. So if you just want to dive into the first class, that's the first class in our certificate, you could just dive right into web development level 1. So just depends on how much you want to kind of get into this and how much of a taste you want to see how coding is and how it works and if it's right for you. So ultimately, to kind of wrap this up, user-centered design. When we focus on how people interact with the thing that we're building, that's when we can design something cool because we're building it for somebody. I'm going to open it up for questions here in the chat for anybody attending live. If you want to, there's some great resources if you want to learn more about these in our classes. And also remember, if you can't take the class, most of these have an associated workbook. Not all of them. Some of the design classes don't, but the like Photoshop, Sketch, they all have books. Adobe Experience Design, we don't have a book yet, but by the time we offer the class, we will have a book available once we start offering the class. We get closer to the date that we're actually running our first class. So does anybody have questions? Yes. So Joseph is asking if the seminar was recorded. We're on YouTube. YouTube records. We'll send you a link next week. We have to do a little bit of prepping on the video to get it ready, and we'll post it. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for notifications of videos that we post. If you can like the video as well, that would be awesome. But subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be notified of future videos being posted, and we will send you an email with the link to watch this back. All right, so I'll hang around a little while in the chat in case people have additional questions, but I'm just going to say thanks for attending, everybody. Like I said, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Whether it's a class or a book, if you want to learn more about any of these apps or these kind of things, please check out our site for more details to learn more in depth. And hope to see you in a future video. Thanks for attending.